Good morning, everybody. It's Monday of Holy Week, and a very, very warm welcome to you to the Vicarage here at Penn on this lovely morning. Great to see you, and thank you for joining us, and hope you had a lovely weekend. Just to remind you, if I may, that we are in Holy Week now, with lots of great services going on in Tamworth and in Penn, and you'd be very, very welcome to join us. Just check out the website on the Facebook pages and tell you what the services are, and do join with us as we explore together and live through again the last week or so of Jesus' life and the resurrection next weekend, and so on. But in our readings for this morning, we are in Matthew chapter 26. Remind you of the context. Last week, Jesus has had his Last Supper with his friends. He's gone out into the Garden of Gethsemane, just on the Mount of Olives. And then some soldiers come with Judas, who betrays him, gives him his position away, gives him a kiss. And then the soldiers take Jesus away. And the first place they go is the chief priest, the Caiaphas' house. And just to remember the situation, the Jewish leaders weren't able to issue the sentence of death, but that's where they took him away to kind of work out what to do with him. But before taking him to Pontius Pilate, that'll be tomorrow, to find for final sentence and so on. So this morning they take Jesus away and they take him to the high priest's house, and this is what happens. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so they might put him to death, but they found none. Then many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." The chief priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you're the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You've now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." And they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also are with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you're talking about." Then he went out to the porch. Another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I've actually been to the house of Caiaphas. It's a fascinating place with a pit in the middle of it where they used to keep prisoners like Jesus. And round it is the words of Psalm 88, one of only 2 psalms in the whole Old Testament which don't have a happy ending. It tells you something about just how isolated Jesus became. But there are kind of 2 bits to this story. First is there's the trial, and then there's Peter. We'll start with the trial. I think 3 or 4 things to say. Firstly, about the trial, I think what you need to kind of recognise firstly is the kind of the sense of urgency. These people really wanted to get rid of Jesus, and they were so keen to do so that they kind of cut corners. You can kind of see. I mean, bear in mind, all these people, all these senior Jews would all have been to a Passover meal with their families, which means that all of them will have been dragged away from their families to come and do this. You can imagine what their wives would have made of that, and their children would have made of that at home. No doubt someone would have had some drink inside them as well, because they'd have had a good feast with their families and friends. And they all will have had to come, so there's that. They also cut corners. Trials were not allowed in the middle of the night. It just wasn't allowed. And they clearly cut corners in all sorts of different ways. And And also when someone was condemned to death, there was supposed to be a 2-day cooling off period and so on. So what I want you to see here is the sense of real urgency. These chief priests really were out to get rid of Jesus. They wanted him out of the way, and they wanted him out of the way fast. I think that's the first thing to say from this. Secondly is the response of Jesus. Jesus says very little when he's ultimately, we don't force Jesus to do anything. When he's kind of really confronted with Caiaphas, he responds with these words about the Son of Man being seated on high. These are words from Daniel. Again, Jesus doesn't pop up, well, his usual way is he kind of did and said things that the kind of messiah-y sorts of things. And they talk about the Son of Man, that's from the book of Daniel. That's describing the Messiah. And he knew it, and they knew it. That's what he was saying, which is why they got so cross with him. That's why the thing is this thing about the temple. That Jesus would not destroy the building, but he'd make a new way of meeting God. That the new temple would be in him. He would be the new temple. And that was the place where you met God. So that's the trial. That's something about what's going on. This kind of illegal nighttime trial. That's what the first thing. Second thing, however, is we need to talk a bit about Peter. Now, this obviously is not Peter's finest hour. And I feel a bit sad for Peter, really, because, as I say, this wasn't his finest hour. 1 hour he had said he'd never deny Jesus and made an oath and so on. And here he is, before the cock crows, he's denied him 3 times. And I think poor old Peter must have cringed every time he heard this story. But I suppose in a sense, I'd just like to say 3 or 4 kind of things in favour of Peter. Firstly, he didn't go all the way, but he did better than all the others. All the others had run off. Peter did at least try and stay with Jesus till the end. I think that's kind of the first thing. So all the others ran off. Peter did at least, albeit at a distance, he did try and stay there till the end. Secondly, I think to be fair to Peter, what Jesus eventually did, he had to do it on his own. I think so that Scripture will be fulfilled. There's no way that mankind will be saved by Jesus and Peter. Jesus had to do this alone. In the words of Isaiah, he had to tread the winepress alone. Ultimately, Jesus did have to do it alone. Thirdly, of course, after he came back, Jesus gave him a way back. And of course, what we know in a few days' time is that by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus would meet Peter and would forgive Peter, and Peter would be given a fresh start. And of course, ultimately, in Rome, some 30 years later, Peter was ultimately martyred for Jesus. So it's a bit unfair to describe Peter as in any way cowardly, because ultimately he did do the final sacrifice for Jesus in the end. He was eventually martyred in Rome under Nero in somewhere between 60 and 70 AD. So this is a difficult time for Peter. But I suppose, like I said, I think as we read it and feel the emotion of it, of Jesus and Peter and the byplay between and what Peter tried to do, in a sense, at least he tried, 10 out of 10 for effort. He did better than all the others. Ultimately, as I say, Jesus had to do this alone. He had to tread the winepress alone. As he said, where I am going, no one can follow. Ultimately, of course, Jesus did forgive him by the Sea of Galilee a few days later. And ultimately, of course, Peter did die for his faith in the end. So he did go through it in the end. But I think read the story, hear the drama, feel the drama, and experience it for afresh this Easter. Anyway, lots to think about this morning.